Tarek, also last weekend, the Palestine Children's Relief Fund held a webinar, and I mentioned this also in my piece that we published yesterday, where NICU physicians were talking about the levels of hypoglycemia, sepsis, dehydration, malnutrition that they're seeing in especially children, but in kind of the general population around Gaza, especially inside these shelters in UN facilities, where someone will come in with an injury, they'll treat the injury as best they can, but then without you know any antibiotics at all left in the Gaza Strip, there's a high possibility that they'll develop sepsis and have to come back, and then it just kind of snowballs into this medical catastrophe. What can you say about these kind of these other factors when we're talking about trying to treat regular wounds or broken bones or shrapnel injuries when there is the possibility of sepsis and other other infections and transmittable diseases running rampant. What does that do to people and the population?
I mean, it's hard to really say this without sounding alarmist, but if things do not change quickly and drastically, it's hard to imagine that we won't see another 20,000 deaths in the coming weeks. And that's not even to mention the long-term disability and the long-term problems. Like from the Great March of Return, there was a significant number of people who became permanently disabled. And that was in the midst of a system that was almost completely primed to care for the people who are being affected. Now, never mind you, this system where almost nobody has the capacity anymore to take care of these patients. So it's really what you're talking about there, the hypoglycemia. I think you might be referring to hypothermia, which was one of the main concerns, especially in younger children. These are things that people suffer from already anyway. Children in Gaza die from hypothermia every year, remarkably. And that has a lot to do with the fact that, there are lots of people who are in unsuitable living situations at a baseline. Now, how many more people are in unsuitable living situations? How many more of those people are going to die of hypothermia? How many more of those people are going to be put together? I think what you're talking about there was the incubator sharing, where these children have a very high rate of complications if they get infections. So that's why you want to keep them kind of think boy in a bubble style. So by putting them together, if anything makes its way into that incubator, it's very likely to hurt or possibly kill not just one baby inside, but all the babies inside. So I think that's when you put all of these together, really what we're seeing is right now that we're on a precipice, we're about to fall, and it's going to be very fast and very bad when that fall does come. The Israelis are probably, they probably want that to happen. They very likely seek that kind of an outcome. That's the only reasonable conclusion when one sees that medical supplies aren't making it to hospitals, when one sees that clean water is not available, and one sees that the very basic, the bottom parts of the hierarchy of needs just are not available.
And Tarek, we should point out that just this week, the World Health Organization issued a warning at the highest level that very soon, and this is presumably true whether or not the horrifying bombardment restarts, that the number of people dying from disease could soon outpace the number of people dying from Israeli bombardment. As you point out, not only the hospitals not functioning, but you have to add on top of that the lack of water and sanitation for people who are confined in horrifying conditions in shelters, in UN schools, and refugee camps where They have no space, no privacy, where you don't have access to latrines, or the latrines that exist do not have running water or flushing water in order to keep them clean, in order for people to clean themselves. And the sewage system has collapsed because of the lack of fuel for pumping. And then in recent days, there have been heavy rains, and winter cold, which by itself adds a huge amount of hardship and stress to people who are already in a horrifying situation, but also increases the risk of contaminated water flooding through the streets and alleyways and homes. And 𝐓𝐡𝐞, I should mention, just sent me an SMS a few moments ago to say he's fine, but unfortunately the power went out in the building he was in. So I don't think we'll be able to get him back today, sadly, but we were very happy to see his face even for those few minutes. But one of the things that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 pointed out in some of his important reporting in recent days from Gaza on his Twitter account is how terrible it is when it rains. On the one hand, you think, well, rain water is something people can collect to relieve the shortage of water, and I'm certain people do collect it, but the rain also adds to the flooding, the shelters that people are in. They're in houses that have been damaged. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 talked about people who are living, a whole displaced family living in an abandoned store, but the rainwater flooded the store, and so kids are trying to just stay dry and above the water. So in other words, it's not just the healthcare system that has collapsed, it's every aspect of life. And then you deal with the fact that people are malnourished, so that their immune system and their ability to withstand disease is presumably also diminished. Tarek, we've had these warnings from international officials now, as I mentioned, the World Health Organizations, about the risk of epidemics. And we've had, for example, Giora Eiland, an Israeli general and official, or former official, but a senior figure in Israel, who has welcomed the prospect, openly, publicly welcomed the prospect of epidemics among the population as a way to help Israel win its war, whatever that means. But so we have these warnings about epidemics and outbreaks already of dysentery and other such diseases. But what does that look like, Tarek? What kinds of epidemics? How fast does this spread? I mean, it's horrible to even talk about, but as you said, this may be coming quickly. What can we expect? What will it look like? And what is needed in order to stave this off and prevent it?
Okay, so I guess a couple of pieces. The first is that the World Health Organization is hugely culpable in what's happening right now. They have options. They've always had options. They weren't even talking seriously about the problem until it was slapping them in the face. So I think the World Health Organization now throwing up their hands and being like, oh my goodness, look at this terrible tragedy that we're facing, is so dishonest and disingenuous. And really, we have to, I think, recognize that and start building something else that's alternative to that, so that we're not counting on or depending on the World Health Organization. Very small example. The World Health Organization could link up with any number of countries, I'm sure Yemen would volunteer, and sail a ship into Gaza. And by just putting their flag on a ship, it would make it much, much, much less likely that the Israelis would do anything about it. Right now, what they're doing, what generally the international community is doing, is they're saying, well, we can't do anything. The Israelis say no. The Egyptians say no. The ERC, the Egyptian Red Crescent, says no. And so all of these people who knew better, it's not like these aren't intelligent people. They're very intelligent people. And to speak to them privately, they all know exactly what's happening. So why did they come to the party late? Why did they decide to only start talking about it when they truly could do nothing? I mean, it's something that I think we have to hold them accountable for. Now, in terms of what the mechanics are, I'm not an epidemiologist, but I'll do my best in terms of what I know about it. As far as I know, there's no cholera in Gaza, so we can all really say, just thank God for that. Cholera has been brought into places by people from outside. Famously in Haiti, it was brought in by blue helmets. But cholera would be probably the worst thing that could happen right now in Gaza in terms of communicable diseases in this environment. Once you exit that, then really it's all of the other things that have to do with dirty water, the regular old, in quotation marks, waterborne diseases. They're not good, but I mean, at least they're not cholera. The problem isn't the diseases. The diseases are actually not very hard to treat. They're not very dangerous in and of themselves. But I'll give you an example of a close friend of mine and a colleague who got sick. So she got sick. She calls me up and tells me her symptoms. And I'm like, okay, you have a waterborne disease. You need clean water and rest and good food. Where's she going to get that? If she had clean water, then it wouldn't have been a problem in the first place. Then she wouldn't have been dealing with a waterborne illness in the first place. And so that's where she was at certain points. I thought maybe this woman is going to die because she couldn't get the things that she needed. The danger, therefore, lies not just in the current conditions that exist, but in their perpetuation. If we're able, right now, I'm entirely sure that a very large number of people have waterborne illnesses. I mean, the Ministry of Health is reporting 70 or 80% have skin diseases that are related to poor sanitation and to communicable disease. So if that's the amount, that's the number that we're talking about with skin-borne diseases, then very likely the waterborne diseases are somewhat very close to that as well.
I can just give you these numbers again from 𝐓𝐡𝐞, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. They say that they've recorded, or the health authorities have recorded 111,000 cases of acute respiratory infection, 36,000 cases of diarrhea in children below 5, and 24,000 cases of skin rash. But again, those are likely severe undercounts. But what do things like that mean in this context, Tarek?
The skin diseases and so on will create sort of people who are weaker, people who are less capable of fighting off other infections and other diseases, and also they're a harbinger of bad things. Once the waterborne diseases really kick in, then basically the cycle takes about 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the availability of water, of any kind of clean water. And if the person isn't able to kind of snap out of it by having enough clean water or being able to fight off the pathogens themselves, then they will either dehydrate because of too much diarrhea, or they will end up dying just because of the infection moving out. That's called sepsis. These, again, you do not get sepsis from diarrhea in Canada because we have very basic treatments that allow that to happen. When it does happen, it's a catastrophe that's reported in the news, when there are outbreaks of E. coli or something like that. And these are the diseases that we're seeing. There's another class of diseases that basically didn't exist in Gaza until 2 months ago, which is fecal oral transmission diseases. So basically, when you're drinking water that is so filthy, we use the euphemism nitrated because, and so when you're drinking water that's so filthy, then there are certain pathogens that only can live in that particular cycle, certain kinds of worms, diseases, etc. Even a type of hepatitis that only really lives in that environment. And I saw this when I was in Iraq, because there the severe shortage of clean water resulted in people hooking pumps into pipes and getting whatever water came out. And in Iraq, they actually used to add cardamom to the water pot because the water used to smell so bad. I expect that it would be very similar in Gaza in the coming weeks if the situation doesn't significantly improve. But I think the other my biggest question, I don't really know the answer to this, is what happens after the ceasefire? Because after the ceasefire, unless the Israelis are honest and unless the Israelis will allow things to happen that they haven't allowed so far, then we're not going to be able to enter the medical teams, the medical resources, the medical supplies that are needed to very quickly try to turn the tide on these diseases.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on donate now. Thank you.